And you are podcasting with Gary DeMar. Let's figure things out.
A couple of times I've run into new Christians, and they often go to the book of Revelation and read it as the first book in the Bible. And it's probably because there's a general consensus that we are living in the end of some prophetic belief system. Maybe many of them came to Christ as a result of some view of the end. Like, you've got to believe this because Jesus is coming soon, and if you die, you're going to go to hell. So you better repent now and believe because you want to make sure that you're caught up in the rapture. And so they start off with eschatology as being the essential part of their worldview, and they have a very shortened time frame because everything's going to fall apart very soon. So they read the book of Revelation, and if anybody has read the book of Revelation knows it's not a straightforward book like if you were to read dealing with eschatology, say Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21. There's his very, very easily identified historical things taking place. There's mention of wars and rumors of wars, and of course you've got the abomination of desolation, you got the temple being destroyed, there's false prophets, you just go on. It's kind of chronological as to what's going to be taking place there. Now there's some symbolic elements in it, to be sure, but the book of Revelation is really a different kind of literature, and you have to understand that. And it's one of the reasons why many commentators who have commented on nearly every other book of the Bible have not done so on the book of Revelation. And as you would expect, there are different interpretations. There are those who believe that the book of Revelation is about our distant future, while the first early chapters are about what was taking place in John's day when this was revealed to him. It's written to 7 churches in Asia Minor. There are the preterists who believe that everything in the book of Revelation was fulfilled before that first generation passed away, based upon what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, and also at the time text, which I'll get to. You have dispensational premillennialists who say everything in the first 3 chapters refers to that time period, but everything after chapter 3, beginning with chapter 4 and going through chapter 19, that doesn't take place yet because the rapture will start off chapter 14. So now we're in a gap between the 3rd and the 4th chapters, and the 4th chapters and beyond have not occurred yet. There is the historicist view. The historicist view says that this is the unraveling of history, and so you can find all kinds of historical realities in what Revelation has to say. The problem with that view is you really don't know what those realities are until they actually take place. There's no prediction as to tell you anything in particular. And then there's the idealist view, is that what the book of Revelation is about is simply principles that are applicable throughout history. And to give you my upfront view, my view is more the preterist view, which even though those things were fulfilled before that generation passed away because of the timing element, but there's application to them throughout history. To give you a good example, and we're going to talk about the beasts in Revelation chapter 13. Just because the fulfillment has already been done doesn't mean there aren't principles there that are applicable. There are always beast-like people, beast-like structures, beast-like political systems. And so it's just because something is fulfilled, we don't say, well, it doesn't apply anymore. I mean, Jesus was crucified 2,000 years ago. It doesn't mean that it's not applicable to today. And so we read the book of Psalms, a lot of history in the book of Psalms, a lot of things written in the book of Psalms that relate to things that happened to David. You can see that in Psalm chapter 18, but the application of that is today. So let's just go through kind of quickly and help with the way to approach the book of Revelation. So knowing when John received the revelation from Jesus through his angel, an angel in Scripture simply means messenger. It can be a heavenly angel. It can be someone like John the Baptist, who was called an angel, a messenger. And as recorded in what is known as the Apocalypse. The Greek word that's used is apocalypse in Revelation 1:1. And some older translations and commentaries call this the Apocalypse, not the book of Revelation. But apocalypse means to unveil or to reveal. And it's crucial to understand this to identify the two beasts in Revelation chapter 13. It's important to note that that Revelation says what follows is soon to come to pass, Revelation 1:1, because the time is near, Revelation 1:3. So right at the start, we're told that what's going to take place is to take place in a relatively short period of time. And some of this gets down to when the book of Revelation was written. For those who believe it was written before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, this would have been a few years before the destruction of Jerusalem. And so the timing indicators fit very well. The last chapter of Revelation repeats the timing factor, the things which must soon take place, 22:6. And do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near, verse 10. If you remember, Daniel was told to conceal and seal up what was revealed to him until the time of the end. That's in Daniel chapter 12, verse 9. What end? The end of the age that Jesus mentioned in Matthew chapter 24, verse 3. And so he was to seal it up to the time of the end, and the end is mentioned in Matthew chapter 24, 3, and that was the end of the age. Peter wrote that the end of all things is near in 1 Peter 4, 7. So it makes no sense to use the words near and shortly in Revelation if the events were soon to take place because the time was near. The passage of nearly 2,000 years without the events of Revelation being fulfilled does not make sense. The timing helps us narrow down the identity of the antichrists, although the word is not used in Revelation, and the beasts, plural. And there are two main traditions regarding the dating of Revelation: the pre-AD 70 Neronic or Nero date and the Domitian date around AD 95. Two types of evidence are presented to support each position: internal and external. Internal evidence uses the Bible. External evidence appeals to historical sources outside of Scripture. Internal evidence, the Bible, is the authoritative evidence. We should always start with where the Bible starts. Now, Francis Gummerlock presents support for the pre-AD 70 composition of Revelation in external evidence for an early date of Revelation. And he mentions that there are 10 early date traditions in ancient Christianity. And I won't go through all these here, but the point is, if you're going to look at external evidence for the dating of Revelation, there is a lot of external evidence for the very early pre-AD 70 date of Revelation. And Frank Gummerlock has done a magisterial work on that. Now, Robert Young, who's author of Young's Analytical Concordance, wrote a commentary on Revelation published before 1855 and made the following claim. It was written in Patmos around AD 68, where John had been banished by Domitian Nero, as stated in the title of the Syriac version of the book. And there are others who made the same deal. So if you want to look at external evidence, there is external evidence. And so I don't want to discount it, but I don't think that's where we ought to start. Norm Geisler and Frank Turek, in their book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, write that most, if not all, of the New Testament books were written before AD 70. That would include the book of Revelation. So external evidence is, in fact, a very prominent feature, and there's good evidence that's indeed the case, that the book of Revelation was written before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. But what we want is internal evidence, because that's more authoritative. So let's look at some of the internal evidence. Again, we already looked at the time indicators in Revelation chapter 1 and 1:1, 1:3, 22:6, 22:10. Another time indicator is that John describes himself as a fellow partaker in the tribulation, which we know that the tribulation period took place before that generation passed away. That's what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 24. And so there's some more internal factors here. In Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, John mentions persecution, tribulation coming from the Jews, which he describes as the synagogue of Satan. After AD 70, this just wasn't an issue. And I believe that the synagogue of Satan is, in fact, the New Testament antichrists, even though the word antichrist is not used in the book of Revelation. And the early persecution against the church came from the Jews. The first believers were Jews, and the first persecutors were Jews. You can see this in Acts chapter 7, verses 54 through 8, chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, and throughout the book of Acts. And then, Herod, he put James to death, and he saw this as it pleased the Jews. And there were, of course, other places in the book of Acts, one case in which the Jews tried to kill the Apostle Paul. So it was only under Nero that Rome came against the church. And this was much later. Ignatius records that before AD 70, persecution from the Jews was especially strong in Smyrna and Philadelphia. This fits precisely with John's statements about these churches. The Jewish persecutions, along with biblical Judaism, ended abruptly after AD 70. Therefore, John's statements to Smyrna and Philadelphia would not apply after the AD 70 date. In fact, you can take all 7 of those churches, and there's nothing in any of those seven churches that refers to something in the distant future. Everything was essentially local. Very much like what we read in Matthew 24, where you could escape the tribulation about destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by fleeing to the mountains outside of Judea. John was given, here's another internal piece of internal evidence. John was given a reed like a measuring rod, and this is Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. And the angel stood saying, "Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there, but leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread this holy city underfoot for 42 months." Well, this is almost exactly what took place with the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And so John is told remember, John is taken up into heaven, and whether he was taken to Jerusalem in a vision, we don't know all that. But he was told to measure the temple, the altar, and those who worship in it. And that temple was still standing before AD 70. It is not standing since then. And of course, a lot of people say, oh, this is a rebuilt temple. Nothing, this is no indication here this is another rebuilt temple. And the Gentiles did, in fact, tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. So these verses provide strong internal evidence for the early date of Revelation, as the temple was still standing when the vision was revealed to John. All sides agree that the temple was destroyed as Jesus had predicted in Matthew chapter 23 and chapter 24 in AD 70. Now, some claim that the temple John was to measure will be a future temple rebuilt during Daniel's 70th week, that is 7 years. This assumes a gap between the 69th and 70 weeks of Daniel's 70 weeks of years, 490 years prophecy in Daniel 9:24 through 27, in which there is no evidence of a gap. The number 70 follows 69, just like the 70th year of the captivity followed the 69th year of the captivity with no gap. The New Testament does not say anything about a rebuilt temple. Paul mentions the temple in 2 Thessalonians 2, which was still standing. That, too, is not a rebuilt temple. Well, I should say, no, it was a rebuilt temple. What it isn't is another rebuilt temple that takes place sometime in the future. So Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 and 2 states that the city will be trodden underfoot for 42 months. Now compare the following. In Luke chapter 21, verse 24, it says, Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, by the nations. That's the better translation is nations, because it's the Greek word ethnon, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So here we see this parallel. Revelation chapter 11:2, it is given unto the Gentiles, same Greek word, and the holy city shall be tread underfoot for 42 months. The Roman-Jewish war lasted approximately for 42 months. Nero commissioned Vespasian to march in March of April of AD 67, and the temple fell in August or September of AD 70. According to Josephus, the temple was burned on the same day and month that the Babylonians did it in the 6th century BC. Now, some say that the temple in Revelation is solely visionary or spiritual. But how could a spiritual temple be trampled underfoot? How could John measure a visionary temple and that have worshipers in it? And so this is obviously something that John saw in terms of the actual physical temple. Now compare it with the vision of Ezekiel that Ezekiel saw. Says there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze, with a thread of flax and a measuring rod in his hand, and he was standing in the gateway. So in that case, Ezekiel is not the one doing the measuring. It was someone else who was measuring a temple that was exclusively a visionary temple. Now, there's the description of the woman in Revelation 17, which is evidence of an early date for Revelation. The woman who rode the beast was said to be drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. She is the great city, Revelation 17:18, and is hated by the beast and the 10 kings who desolate her and burn her up with fire. Again, this, I believe, is dealing with Israel, this is Jerusalem is the great city, and Jerusalem was in fact burned up. And you can see this in Matthew chapter 22, verse 7, and Luke's 19:27. And more specifically, it is said that in her was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and all who have been slain on the earth, that is, in the land. And for 18:24 of Revelation. And the saints and apostles and prophets were told to rejoice over her destruction. That is, again, Jerusalem, because God has pronounced judgment against her, Revelation 18:20. Now, so who is responsible for shedding all the blood of the prophets and the saints, according to Jesus, and who would receive judgment as a result? The answer can be found in Matthew chapter 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murder the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of innocent Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things shall come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not see or behold, your house is being left to you desolate. This is a perfect parallel with what you're reading in Revelation chapters 17 and 18, what you read in Matthew 23:28. And the word desolate is used in Matthew 23:38, just as it is used in Revelation 17:16, Revelation 18:17, Revelation 18:19, as well as in Daniel chapter 9:27 and Luke 21:20. Jerusalem was the prophetic New Testament Babylon the Great in the book of Revelation. And you can see this when you look at Matthew 24:29. The sun, moon, and stars language that's used there is taken from Isaiah chapter 13, verse 10, which was applied to Babylon, Old Covenant Babylon. Jerusalem is identified as the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord was crucified. See, these parallels are unmistakable, and they don't fit something in the distant future. They do, in fact, fit something related to what was going to take place to that generation. So the image of the unfaithful wife, the harlot, was often used of Israel in the Old Testament. Israel is repeatedly called the wife of God in Jeremiah and Isaiah. But she was an unfaithful wife, Jeremiah 3:20, Hosea chapter 1, verse 2, and other places, behaving as a prostitute, Jeremiah 3, verses 1 through 2. In the context of Jerusalem designation as a prostitute, Isaiah 1:21 is especially noteworthy. See how the faithful city has become a harlot. So there's so much more going on here dealing with the harlot's attire, and maybe I'll come back to this at another time in dealing with some other aspects of the book of Revelation to get to the timing of things, especially related to the beasts in Revelation chapter 13. But I think at this point you get the idea that the parallels are there. The timing is there, the identifying what was going to take place, the timing of these events, they were to be happen shortly and near. We see that the harlot there the harlot has to be someone related to the people of God, just like Hosea is told to marry a harlot. It's Rome wasn't the harlot, Jerusalem was the harlot. And the harlot's attire, purple, scarlet, gold, jewels, and pearls, this was nearly identical to the ephod worn by the high priest mentioned in Revelation 17:4 and Exodus chapter 28, verses 5 through 21. The golden cup she held was likely symbolic of the temple vessels, the majority of which were made of gold and silver. According to the Jewish historian Josephus, on Aaron's forehead was the inscription, Holy to the Lord, Exodus 28:36. The harlot's forehead included the title Babylon the Great, mother of harlots, and of the abominations of the land. So this, to me, is a grand explanation of why the book of Revelation is said, the events are said to take place soon because the time was near. At the beginning of the book and the end of the book, chapter 1 and chapter 22, all these things fit in. Even the external evidence fits with Revelation being written before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and all the things also related to what the scriptures say about Israel's defection from the Christian faith and its judgment that took place in AD 70.
Thanks for podcasting with Gary DeMar. Please subscribe and share this with anyone you think really needs to hear it.